So this video is all about pricing, and I think pricing is technically the most difficult thing we do in our real estate lives. And what I want to do is just talk to you about some of the fundamentals of price, because ultimately we want to make sure that when you're putting your listings up, you're giving that listing the best opportunity to move as fast as possible. And I think pricing is something that needs to be practiced weekly in your agency. I want to start with the price compendium. I really believe that in order for you to have a really good conversation on price, I think the way you show price needs to differ from agency to agency. And one of the recommendations that I make is, rather than printing stuff out from online, so whether that's CoreLogic or whether that's other data sources, what often happens is if they've seen another agency print out the same list, what they turn around to you to say, hey, I've seen that list, what do you think? And there lies the issue, you shooting from the hip with a price and putting yourself in a situation where you're just telling a price without filling them out first. Because the problem with that is once you shoot that price off, you own that price. So leading into that, the price compendium is really important. So what I mean by that is I would prefer that every time property leases or sells, you have a picture per property as a reference point. So what you want to do is all of the leases that have happened in your area, put them in price order and put them in market order. So what you want to be doing in the pricing conversation, rather than saying, here's a list of all the properties, I think it's worth this, what you want to do is talk at one picture per property and one price per property. So the conversation would be, this one leased for $30,000 per annum. This was the type of tenant that moved in. It took 2 weeks to lease. And look at their eyes and see how they react. And the question that we need to ask is, if this one leased for $30,000 or if this one sold for $2 million, the question we've got to ask is, how much more over that would those tenants have paid for yours? Now, just flushing that price out and stopping and asking them the question we need to ask is how much over that. Typically, if they've got a position on price, at that point it will come out. They'll respond by saying, well, we've got to be able to get 25,000 then, or we've got to be able to get 2.2 million then. And so the idea is using that technique to flush price out. Now, of course, sometimes that doesn't quite work out that way. And what we find is that people will, when you probe them on that, will flip the conversation back on you and say, well, what do you think it's worth? What I would do at that point is push that conversation aside and say, look, the one that we've just compared is inferior to yours. Let me show you another one. Now, this one sold for 2.1 million, or this one leased for $25,000 a year. And what I want to do is see, in terms of a rational conversation, if the tenants had seen this for 25,000, how much over this would they have paid for yours, I guess is the question. Usually what I've found, by moving to the second and the third listing on one single page, you can tend to have a more open discussion on price. And what will end up happening is you'll come up with a range. And I guess at that point, what we need to then discuss is not so much the price being just the important thing, rather it's the process that gets the most out of the market. And at that point, when we're actually talking price, we've got to get them off price and onto process. Because if they're sort of responding by saying, well, I really want to get 27,000 a year, or I really want to get 2.3, my response always to that is not to look at them and say, well, no, we can't get that. My response to that is, first of all, I can see that price is important. Can I ask you how you came up with that? And often how they came up with it is that they needed it. So I guess at that point, it's like, how much do they need to sell? What I want you to be able to do an hour into the conversation is be in control of you saying yes or no to their listing, not them saying yes or no to you. So the problem with you going and saying a price and whether it's doable or not at that point is that you really don't know the motivation at that point. So when they turn it to you and they say, well, what do you think it's worth? We've got to get them off price and onto process. And at that point, my response quite simply would be, look, what we know about Real Commercial is that right now you could be looking at leasing some office space. It might be in Cairns in Queensland. Right now, if you put 20,000 a year in Cairns in Queensland, or if you're buying a property in South Australia, and let's say that's in the Adelaide CBD, and you're looking at office space, you put that price, you click price order, quite quickly you can be a pricing expert in under 5 minutes. So buyers generally get a range pretty quickly, and buyers come up with the price themselves, and they actually rationalise the price the same as you rationalise it when you bought this. So the question is, how do we get them to pay more than that range? How do we get them to pay more than market value? How do we get them to ignore that data? Well, it's all got to do with timing with price, and it's all got to do with competition. Because with the right timing of the price and the timing of the strategy, finding the buyers in the first week or two means that they shift their first offers usually up higher. So an example of that, we've got tenant number one. They see a property day two. There's 3 or 4 other tenants looking at it. The lease on it, $25,000 a year. Is their rationale going to be to offer $15,000 a year and extended terms? The answer is not. They'll pay 20 or 25 or whatever that list price is. Why? Because it's been on the market for 2 days. Second, it was leased initially for $30,000 and the agent has dropped it over time to $18,000. So eventually it's been come under the price, which is now why that tenant, that same tenant that just loves it as much, has turned up. Their rationale is not to offer 18, it's actually to offer 12 or 15. Why? Because it's been on the market for 2 months. So time relates to price, and particularly it affects the first offers. So we need to explain that to the actual landlords, we need to explain that to the owners of the properties, and what we need to explain is that timing with price is critical, particularly in terms of whether we're protecting the value or whether we're in the sale world trying to push the price up. And the second is competition, and if we want to get a high price or we want to protect the value of a lease, we need to get those tenants and those buyers seeing that property all exactly at the same time. And what happens when they have competition is they begin to ignore the data. They begin to ignore what the data online is saying. And what they begin to do is focus on what the next person is doing. So if they know there are 2 other 3 people applying for the place, what they'll do is typically not negotiate. Or if it's a sale, if they see 2 or 3 other people bidding on it, what they'll do is bid higher and ignore the data. So the formula that we're looking for here is timing with price. We need to do it in the first 2 to 3 weeks. And as well, we need to create the competition. And with that, we'll be able to protect the value of the lease, and of course, we'll be able to sell it for above price. So in terms of pricing, what I want to do is explain to you how the marketplace works. So every single year, there is a certain number of transactions that happen in each segment of the market. So in your market right now, you'll have an entry-level market, you'll have a middle market, you'll have a top, and you might even have a top-end market above that. In the context of commercial, there's usually 3 or 4 markets in every market segment. So have a look at that market segment for what it is. And let's just say, for argument's sake, the market segment we're talking about are leases in the entry-level marketplace. And let's say that for you is $0 to $50,000 per annum. What we need to do is we need to go onto Real Commercial and have a look from $0 to $50,000 an annum, on average, how many properties are being taken off the site every single month. Or monitoring on site, how many are coming on and coming off. And you really should know this data. And what we know, for instance, as a case study example, if there's 120 leases that get taken up in your marketplace every single year, what that means is that every 30 days, 10 get taken up. So what we know about that is that if that property was to go live on Real Commercial, there'll be 10 different businesses all considering leasing a property at that period of time. So the pool of tenancies, or the pool of tenants, there's actually 10 of them. So if we're sort of thinking we've got to wait 2-3 months for these people to turn up, the argument is if no one's actually inquired in that first 2 or 3 weeks, the argument is 8 people have already bypassed it. Why? Because 10 usually go off every month. This is the same for sales. Every year, there's in different markets, there's different pool of buyers that transact in that marketplace. You need to know every 30 days roughly how many buyers transact in that marketplace. And the language needs to be, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, we know every 30 days, 6, 8, 10, 20 buyers buy in this price bracket. So if we're on the market for a week and nothing's happening, we know 5 buyers have already bypassed it. And that's where we need to look at a realignment. So it's not that we're ever looking for new people. The people are always there. Real Commercial have always got people there looking. It's a question or not that they respond to your marketing. The other thing we need to mention to our clients is there's 2 types of agents. The first one is one that goes in, they put a lot of energy around a price they believe that exists for that property in the marketplace. They have no process. And in fact, what they do is hoodwink the clients into signing with them. And then there is agent number 2 that actually has a thorough process. They talk about the philosophy of marketing. They talk about how they actually qualify the leads, both online and over the phone. They talk about the fact that they need to time the buyer or time finding the tenant in the first 2 to 3 week window. They actually explain the differences in the marketing products. Why? Because we want to maximize the pressure of the amount of people that want to buy it all exactly at the same time. That then creates the premium. They want to talk about their negotiation, how they put the deal together and how they make sure they're protecting the value of the client's asset. So all those things need to be flushed out. Do you want to go for agent A, the ones that just calls the price that has no substantial process, or agent B that takes you through a thorough process and case study on how they got there? The question we need to ask ourselves, are the clients seeing your property on the must-see list or the not-to-see list? So as you can see, the pricing conversation is a highly sensitive one. It's one that we need to really focus on and make sure we get right without losing the opportunity. Good luck.